Wellbeing is a continuous journey and a continuous state. It's not a program that we put in place. It's actually something we need to start infusing into a lot of our practices. The way we design work, the way we educate managers, the way we provide them with the tools to be that first point of contact. And I also believe there's work to be done in HR. I don't think we've done a very good job of equipping and enabling HR to do much more in terms of support from a mental well-being point of view than referring out to the support network. And I believe that needs to change.
Hello everyone and welcome to HR Hot Topics. My name is Erik van Vulpen, with me is Dieter Veldsman, and we're going to talk about an important topic, which is about well-being and mental health.
Erik, it's been called the silent crisis, and I think we've seen a lot of traction over the past period in terms of the importance of mental well-being within the workplace. What I'd like to talk about today is that we need to encourage organizations to continuously invest in the well-being and specifically in the mental well-being of their workforce. A lot of people had this inclination to say, but we've passed the pandemic, and we still find a lot of the newest research tells us that people are still stressed at work, anxiety is still at high levels, with people fearing what is going to happen to my job in terms of AI. Am I going to lose my job in future? Rising costs of living and inflation. And we find that organizations still need to put strategies in place with regards to the mental well-being of their employees. Erik, to kickstart us, what do you think and why do you think is it important that organizations invest in mental well-being?
Now, of course, we're both not experts and we're talking about this from an HR angle and not from a medical angle. But I think if we look at society around us, there's more and more emphasis on the importance of mental health. I'm thinking of Naomi Osaka, who decided to stop her tennis career and take a prolonged break just, to prioritize her mental well-being. Shawn Mendes did the same. So I think for a lot of younger people, the younger generation that comes into the organization, mental well-being is much more front and center, and we're much more comfortable talking about it. And I think add to that the fact, that we spend 1/3 of our lives at work. I think it is a very important conversation to have, and it's important to think about what is the impact that work has on our mental well-being as workers, and also how can we make that better. Just like we want to make people more engaged, we also want to take care of their mental well-being, because I think that is a key way to get people more engaged.
I think something that is moving in the right direction, Erik, is at least in terms of accessibility to mental well-being resources. We've seen a lot of new digital platforms that at least provides accessibility, because that has been a very big barrier in the past in terms of people being able to access mental health services. And I believe organizations have a lot more choice beyond just traditional employee assistance programs these days to provide a variety of channels that are confidential and more suited to the needs of different generations within the workforce pertaining to getting access to mental well-being support. So I also believe, and that kind of builds on your example, that we've finally reached a stage where there's language to discuss this, and we've started to demystify and destigmatize what mental well-being really refers to. From an HR point of view, how do you think I should approach that as HR in terms of putting together my mental well-being strategy?
I think mental well-being should be part of the broader well-being strategy that you have in the organization. And I'm referring now to the World Economic Forum that says, they talk about total well-being that encompasses physical well-being, financial well-being, and mental well-being. And I think there's also a strong case to add social well-being to that equation as well. I think as an organization and as HR, we should take a look inward and get a sense of what are we addressing, and are we taking care of total well-being, or are we only focusing on physical well-being or one or two of these aspects? I think another thing that becomes more and more relevant is, in an age where we're more and more connected, where we see more and more what others are doing on platforms like TikTok, like Instagram, what does that do with our well-being and with our sense of connectedness? And I think that goes back to that social well-being aspect that I think is also very important for our mental well-being.
There's something on the rise here, Erik, and you've kind of referred to it, that I think we're going to have to help organizations and employees with in the future. And that's really the rise of loneliness, and workplace loneliness in particular, with a lot of people starting to work in more hybrid setups and hybrid ways. And I don't refer to the fact that you need friends at work. What I'm talking about is that sense of social connection that you need and that you need to get out of your job in terms of engaging with colleagues. It is a real challenge, because I think to a large part, a lot of organizations have left that to the devices of the individual to manage themselves or to manage on their own. And it is going to be quite a mindset shift that we have to help organizations understand, that you have to almost engineer social connection as part of a holistic well-being program. And that for me comes with a couple of shifts that organizations need to make in terms of well-being is a continuous journey and a continuous state. It's not a program that we put in place. It's actually something we need to start infusing into a lot of our practices. the way we design work, the way we educate managers, the way we provide them with the tools to be that first point of contact. And I also believe there's work to be done in HR, because in my view, and I'd love your view on this, I don't think we've done a very good job of equipping and enabling HR to do much more in terms of support from a mental well-being point of view than referring out to the support network. And I believe that needs to change.
I fully agree. And we speak more and more about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I think when we talk about social well-being, that belonging piece becomes an increasingly important part of what we do in HR. And I think when we bring it back to the mental well-being topic, if you have those social connections and if you do have a sense of belonging, if you have problems, you don't just have the organization that you can talk to, you can also talk to your peers. And then I think there's also a conversation to be had about what is the role of the different parties, what is the role, and maybe that's a question I should ask to you, Dieter, what is the role of the organization and what is the role of the individual employee here?
That's a crucial point, that Erik, because I believe what happened during COVID, and I think it was, it's one of those unintended consequences that happened where I believe a lot of people felt powerless, so they almost outsourced their well-being to the organization. It was the responsibility of the organization to make sure I had support structures in place. We have to make sure that individuals also understand that there's a personal responsibility that you also have pertaining to your own well-being. The organization has got a responsibility to make sure that there's an environment where you as an individual can flourish and that you've got the necessary resources to meet the demands of the workplace. But there's also an individual responsibility about me looking holistically at both my personal and professional life and saying, what does well-being look like for me? What are my coping mechanisms? What gives me energy? What detracts energy from that as well? So I think that is a bit of a process that does need to shift a little bit, and we almost need to help individuals take ownership of their own well-being. And having said that, also to help HR managers, leaders, also understand the fact that they are an employee first. So if they don't look after their own well-being, they can't do anything beyond that for the rest of the organization. Very often we find that middle layer burns out in an organization. And you mentioned loneliness. What's really, really interesting is younger employees are starting to also experience loneliness, where a lot of people only ascribe that to people leaving the workforce a lot later. You're starting to see that actually at different parts of the workforce. So I think there's work to be done around whose responsibility is well-being and who takes ownership and accountability for well-being holistically.
And maybe one thing that we haven't touched on yet is the well-being piece when it comes specifically to the HR population. Because I think as HR professionals, we may be very inclined to take a lot of care about the well-being of others, but to your point, you are an employee first, and if you can't take care of yourself, it will be very hard to take care of others. I think the same holds true for HR professionals as well. So do prioritize when it is needed your own well-being first, because it's just like in an airplane. If you don't put on your own mask first, you won't be able to help others, because you'll pass out at some point.
I want to build on that point a bit, Erik, and I'm going to use a personal example here. Whenever HR professionals at times believe they also need help from a well-being perspective, very often the barriers that we try to overcome in the organization actually holds us back. So for example, confidentiality. We want to make sure that there's confidential channels to seek help. As HR, we also know that a channel will always have a bit of a trail, and even though we keep that information confidential, we don't want our information to pop up somewhere, from an HR perspective looking at that. So in the well-being space, we have to start thinking about creating certain barriers and doing things in a particular way that HR professionals also have the opportunity to access support services in a confidential way, in a respectful manner, and in a way that also treats them with dignity and respect. Because I often believe that that's the barrier in terms of why people don't want to access that. A lot of stigma, I believe, still exists within the HR community around the fact that you have to ask for help and it's okay to ask for help, and we need to overcome that.
So Dieter, maybe a question to wrap this up. If there's HR professionals watching and they think, okay, mental well-being is important and we're not doing anything in our organization at the moment, what is the first thing that they can do in order to get a quick win going?
I think, Erik, the first thing is have an understanding in terms of where your organization is at the moment. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of data usually available without being intrusive, to just have an understanding of the pulse of the organization, whether that's through an engagement survey or whether through informal conversations. I believe your biggest bet and your biggest win can be around how do we help managers identify the signs that somebody is struggling in their team and what is it that they should do, and then obviously put together that first line of support with professional help that people can call on. That's a great starting point, I think, at least to hold the space, and then from there we can build the more total well-being approach that you referred to earlier. But for me, get started there, understand what's going to make the biggest difference now with the organization is, get managers on board in terms of being able to spot where there might be some mental well-being challenges, and get some professional help as a first steer to hold the space and refer people through to that. And I think that already puts you on a good path towards success in the long term.
Dieter, I think well-being and mental health is an incredibly important topic that we can still say a lot of things about. I think one of the good things that came from the pandemic is that there's an increased emphasis on the importance of mental well-being. And I think that is a big win. For those who want to learn more about well-being, we have a talent management certificate program where we also have a specific course on mental well-being, where we also address loneliness, a key factor in decreases in mental well-being on the work floor, and where you can learn much more about and go much deeper, and also access practical resources that will help you establish well-being, total well-being in your organization. Also in the AIHR community, if you're a member, we also have multiple webinars, resources on well-being. If that's of interest to you, I would also highly recommend that. Now, before we go, I want to ask you one thing, which is to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell, because whenever we publish new content about HR, you'll be kept in the loop. With that being said, Dieter, thank you very much and have a brilliant day.